The horse was seconds away from being dragged out and discarded when the young man suddenly raised his hand, and everything in the auction room went silent. People laughed as he paid for the most unwanted animal of the day, but no one noticed the way the horse kept staring at the far end of the room, as if it wasn't afraid of being sold, only of where it would be taken next. The laughter didn't stop when the bidding ended. It followed him all the way to the edge of the ring. Dust drifted through the late afternoon light, turning the air inside the auction barn thick and slow. Men leaned against the wooden rails, some still shaking their heads, others already turning away as if the moment wasn't worth remembering. "You actually paid for that?" one voice called out. Another answered before he could. "Kid must be new around here." The young man didn't respond. His hand closed around the rope, rough fibers pressing into his palm, grounding him in a way the noise couldn't. Beside him, the horse stood unnaturally still, not tense, not afraid, just still. Most horses shifted under the weight of a new hand. They tested the rope, stamped the ground, breathed heavier in unfamiliar air. This one did none of that. Its head remained slightly lowered, its dark eyes half-shadowed beneath a tangled mane, as if the outcome had never mattered. The young man stepped forward, guiding it out of the ring. The boards creaked under his boots, each step echoing faintly in the hollow space. Behind him, the auctioneer's voice had already picked up again, fast and rhythmic, pulling the room back into motion. The world didn't wait. It never did. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner. The sun hovered low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt lot. Trucks lined the edges, trailers rattling faintly in the breeze. The young man paused near the ramp. For a moment, he didn't move. Neither did the horse. Up close, the animal looked even thinner than it had in the ring. Its coat, once a muted gold, had dulled into something closer to dust. A faint line ran along its shoulder, not fresh, but not forgotten either. "You don't make much sense," the young man muttered quietly. The horse flicked an ear. He lifted the rope slightly, not pulling, just suggesting. After a brief pause, the horse followed. The trailer groaned as the weight shifted inside. The young man stepped back, watching carefully, ready for resistance that never came. The horse walked in, turned once, and stood facing the open door, watching him. That feeling returned again. Not recognition. Something quieter. Something harder to name. The door shut with a dull final sound. The drive out of town passed in long stretches of silence. Gravel crunched beneath the tires, fading into the hum of open road. The sky darkened slowly, colors draining into deeper shades of blue and gray. Every few minutes, the young man glanced into the side mirror. The horse hadn't moved much. No panic, no restless shifting, just standing. Steady. The property came into view as dusk settled fully over the land. A small cabin, weathered but standing. A fence that leaned more than it should. A barn that held together out of habit rather than strength. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The young man stepped out of the truck and opened the trailer. The horse stood where it had been the entire drive. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the horse stepped down. Its hooves touched the dirt softly, almost without sound. It lifted its head slightly, just enough for the wind to reach it. The air moved across the open land, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and something older beneath it. The young man reached for the rope again. "We'll get you settled," he said. But the horse didn't follow. Not immediately. Its ears turned forward, sharp and focused on something beyond the fence line. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Attention. The young man frowned, glancing in the same direction. At the far edge of the property, past a stretch of uneven ground, stood a single tree, bare, motionless. Its branches twisted against the darkening sky like something left behind too long. The horse took a step toward it. The rope tightened. "Hey," the young man said, pulling lightly. "Not tonight." The horse stopped. For a moment it resisted, not with force, but with weight, a quiet refusal that settled into the ground beneath it. Then, slowly, it gave in. The connection broke. He led it into the barn, the door creaking open into a space dimly lit by the last fading light. Fresh hay covered the floor of the stall, the scent warm and familiar. The horse stepped inside. This time it didn't hesitate. The young man closed the gate and leaned against the wooden frame, watching. The animal lowered its head, not to eat, but to stand there, breathing warily, as if listening to something the walls couldn't block. "You'll figure it out," he said quietly. He wasn't sure if he meant the horse or himself. Night settled in. Wind moved softly across the land, brushing against the barn, slipping through small cracks in the wood. The young man left the door slightly open and walked back toward the cabin, his steps steady, unhurried. Halfway there, he stopped. Something had changed. He turned. The barn door stood wider than before. A faint scrape echoed across the ground. The rope, sliding. And beyond it, a shape already moving through the dark, heading straight toward the edge of the property. Toward the dead tree. The young man didn't think. He ran. Cold air tore through his lungs as he crossed the yard, boots hitting the ground harder than he intended. The dark had thickened, swallowing the edges of everything familiar. Ahead, the faint outline of the horse moved with unsettling certainty. No hesitation, no wandering. Just a straight path towards that same distant point, toward the tree. "Hey!" he called out, voice breaking the silence. The horse didn't slow. The rope dragged behind it, whispering across the dirt like something alive. He pushed faster, closing the distance just enough to see the animal's posture. Ears forward, neck stretched slightly, as if pulled by something beyond sight. Not fear, not panic, purpose. That word settled uneasily in his chest. By the time he reached the fence line, the horse had already slipped through a broken section where the wood sagged inward. He cursed under his breath and followed, the dry grass brushing against his legs as he forced his way through. The land beyond the fence felt different, quieter, the kind of quiet that didn't belong to night alone. The tree stood ahead, its bare branches cutting into the sky like black veins. Up close, it looked older than the rest of the land, older than the fence, older than the barn, maybe older than anything still standing around it. The horse slowed as it approached, then stopped. The young man caught up a second later, reaching instinctively for the rope. This time the horse didn't resist when he grabbed it, but it didn't move away either. It stayed rooted to that spot. "What is it?" he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. The horse lowered its head, not grazing, searching. Its hoof shifted forward, pressing into the dirt. Once, then again, a soft scrape, deliberate, measured, not random movement, but something closer to intention. The young man watched, unease tightening in his chest. "You smell something?" he asked quietly. No reaction. Just another scrape. The sound seemed louder out here, cutting through the stillness. The ground was harder than it looked, packed down over time. Whatever lay beneath it hadn't been disturbed in a long while. The horse paused, then struck the earth again, this time harder. The young man stepped closer, crouching slightly as he studied the patch of dirt. At first he saw nothing, just dry soil and scattered roots pushing up from below. Then, something different. A faint change in color. A darker tone beneath the surface. He brushed it with his hand, pushing aside loose dirt. The soil shifted easily at first, then resisted, as if layered over something denser. "Hold on," he whispered. The horse didn't move. It stood over him now, head lowered, watching. Not the horizon, not the land, but him, waiting. The realization settled slowly. This wasn't random. It had led him here. The young man swallowed, his fingers digging deeper into the ground. Dirt gathered beneath his nails as he worked, pulling away small clumps, clearing more of that darker patch. Wood, old, weathered. His breath caught. A piece of something buried flat beneath the surface. He sat back slightly, staring at it, his thoughts scrambling to catch up with what his hands had already found. "This doesn't make sense," he said under his breath. The wind shifted. For a brief second it carried a different scent, faint, almost gone before he could place it. Not decay. Something older. Something forgotten. The horse exhaled softly. A low sound, almost like a release. The young man looked up at it. Did someone leave something here? No answer. Of course not. But the question didn't feel empty. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands, eyes still fixed on the ground. The piece of wood lay half exposed now, its edges uneven, as if time had tried to erase it but failed. Whatever it wasn't supposed to be seen. Not anymore. A chill moved through him, sharper than the night air. He reached for the rope again. "All right," he said, voice quieter now. "That's enough for tonight." The horse didn't argue, but it didn't step away immediately either. It lingered, just for a second, then finally turned, following him back toward the fence. The distance between the tree and the barn felt longer on the return. The land seemed to stretch in unfamiliar ways, shadows shifting where they hadn't before. He didn't look back. Not until they reached the fence line again, and even then, it was only for a moment. The tree stood exactly where it had been, unmoving, silent, but the ground beneath it was no longer untouched. Back in the barn, the horse settled into the stall without hesitation. This time it lowered its head to the hay, taking a few slow bites, as if nothing had happened, as if it had done what it needed to do. The young man stood there longer than he meant to, watching, thinking. Something about the way the horse moved now felt lighter. Not physically. Something else. He shook his head and stepped back, pulling the door closed. The night pressed in around the barn, thick and quiet once more. Inside the cabin, he washed his hands slowly, dirt swirling down the drain. He stared at the sink longer than necessary, his mind replaying the scene in fragments, the scraping, the wood, the way the horse had waited. He dried his hands and turned toward the window. From here he could just make out the outline of the field. Beyond it, the tree, barely visible in the dark. For a moment, everything held still. Then, a flicker. Not light, movement. At the base of the tree, he leaned closer to the glass, breath fogging the surface. There it was again, something shifting where the ground had been disturbed. Not the horse, something else. And this time, it wasn't alone. The glass trembled faintly under his breath as he leaned closer, straining to separate shadow from shape. Out there, near the base of the tree, something shifted again, slow, deliberate, not carried by wind. He didn't think long. The door slammed behind him as he stepped back into the night, boots hitting the dirt with urgency now. The cold bit harder this time, sharper against his skin, as if the land itself had changed in the last few minutes. "Hey!" he called, though he didn't know who or what he was calling to. No answer. Only the distant creak of wood from the barn. And something else. Movement. He grabbed a flashlight from the truck, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The field stretched ahead, uneven and unfamiliar, each step carrying him closer to the place the horse had chosen, the place it refused to leave. As he passed the fence, the broken slat brushed against his shoulder, a reminder of how easily the boundary had been crossed. The tree came into view again, closer now, larger. The beam of light found the ground first, the disturbed patch of dirt, the exposed edge of that buried wood, and then a figure, standing just beyond it. The young man stopped, not out of fear, but because something about the stillness in front of him demanded it. "Who's there?" he asked, voice lower this time. The figure didn't move. The light trembled slightly in his hand as he lifted it higher, illuminating more of the shape. An older woman. Thin, shoulders slightly hunched, her coat hanging loosely around her frame. Her face was half-shadowed, but her eyes caught the light, sharp, unwavering. Not surprised, not afraid. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried easily across the space between them. The young man swallowed, lowering the flashlight just a fraction. "I live here," he replied. A pause. The woman's gaze shifted, not to him, but to the ground beside him, to the place where the soil had been disturbed. "I know," she said quietly. That answer unsettled him more than anything else. "How do you—" "You bought the horse." It wasn't a question. The words landed between them, heavy with something he couldn't quite place. He hesitated. "Yeah." Another silence stretched, thicker this time. The woman stepped forward slowly, stopping just at the edge of the disturbed ground. Her eyes lingered there, tracing the outline of what had been uncovered. "It always comes back to this place," she murmured. The young man frowned. "What do you mean?" Her gaze lifted to meet his. "That horse," she said, "was never meant to leave." The wind moved through the branches above them, a dry, hollow sound that filled the space where her words ended. "That doesn't make any sense," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had before. The woman crouched down near the exposed wood, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface. She didn't dig, didn't try to uncover more, just touched it. "As long as this stays buried," she said slowly, "things stay quiet." The young man's chest tightened. "And if it doesn't?" Her hand stilled. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she looked up at him again, something heavier settling behind her eyes. "You've already started something," she said. "You just don't know it yet." A faint sound broke the moment. Behind him. He turned instinctively. The horse, standing just beyond the edge of the light. He hadn't heard it approach. It stood there now, still as before, watching the two of them. Its ears were forward again, focused, not on the man this time, but on the woman. Recognition. That was the only word that fit. The woman rose slowly to her feet, her expression shifting, softening, just slightly. "It remembers," she whispered. The young man looked between them, confusion tightening into something sharper. "Remembers what?" But the woman didn't answer him. Instead, she stepped back. One step, then another. "You should cover it," she said, her voice quieter now. "Put it back the way it was." "Wait," he called out. "What is it?" She stopped. For a moment it seemed like she might turn back, but she didn't. "Some things," she said without looking at him, "don't stay buried because they're forgotten." Her figure faded into the darkness beyond the tree, swallowed by the night as completely as if she had never been there at all. The young man stood frozen, the silence pressing in around him again. The horse shifted slightly, stepping closer to the disturbed ground. He looked down at the exposed wood, then back at the horse. "You knew," he said quietly. The horse didn't move, didn't react, but it didn't look away either. The young man exhaled slowly, tension settling into his shoulders. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what you brought me to." He knelt down again, this time without hesitation, his hands moving with more purpose than before. Dirt gave way beneath his fingers, loosening faster now, as if whatever held it together had already been broken. More of the wood appeared, wider, longer, not just a piece, a lid. The realization hit him all at once. This wasn't debris, it was a box, buried deliberately. His hands slowed, not from uncertainty, from the weight of what it meant. Behind him the horse let out a low breath. Steady, present, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. The young man wiped his hands against his jeans, staring at the outline now clearly visible beneath the soil. "All right," he said again, softer this time. He reached for the edge and paused. Something inside him shifted. Not fear. Something deeper. The kind of instinct that warns you not to cross a line you can't uncross. He hesitated, just long enough for the silence to settle again. Then, he heard it. A faint sound. From inside. Not movement, not a voice. Something softer. Like air escaping through something that had been sealed too long. The young man froze. His hand still resting against the edge of the buried lid. The horse didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. And for the first time since the auction, the young man wasn't sure if uncovering the truth was what the horse had wanted at all. His fingers tightened along the edge, not lifting, just feeling the grain of the wood beneath the dirt. It was colder than the air, as if it had held onto something the ground refused to forget. The sound came again. Faint. Not from outside, from within. The young man pulled his hand back slowly, breath catching somewhere between instinct and reason. He looked up at the horse, searching for something. Guidance, resistance, anything that would make sense of what stood in front of him. The horse didn't move, but its presence felt different now. Not leading, not urging, watching, waiting for him to decide. "That's it, isn't it?" he murmured. "You brought me here, but this part is mine." The wind shifted again, colder now, brushing past the tree and settling low against the ground. It carried no scent this time, just a hollow stillness that seemed to press inward. He exhaled slowly and reached forward again. This time he didn't hesitate. The dirt loosened more easily as he cleared the remaining edges, uncovering the full shape beneath. It wasn't large, but it was deliberate. Straight lines, reinforced corners. Something built to last longer than whatever had placed it there. A box. No markings. No sign of who had buried it. Just time. He brushed the surface clean, revealing the faint outline of a seam along the top. His fingers traced it, pausing at one corner where the wood had split just enough to create a small gap. Another sound slipped through. Not air. Not quite. Something softer. Something that made his chest tighten without warning. He leaned closer, pressing his ear just above the opening. Silence then. A faint, irregular rhythm. Not mechanical. Not random. Alive. His breath caught. "No," he whispered, pulling back quickly. "That's not possible." The horse shifted behind him, a single step forward, closing the distance between them. Its presence pressed against his awareness, not intrusive, but grounding. Real. He looked back at it, searching its eyes again. "You knew," he said quietly. "You didn't just bring me here for something buried." The horse didn't blink, didn't break that steady, unwavering gaze. The young man turned back to the box, his pulse louder now, each beat echoing in his ears. His hands moved with urgency this time, clearing the remaining dirt, exposing the full lid. He found the edge again, pulled. At first, nothing happened. The wood resisted, held in place by time and pressure. He adjusted his grip, planting his feet more firmly against the ground. "Come on." He pulled again, harder. A sharp crack split the silence as the seal gave way. The lid shifted. Just enough. The smell hit him first. Not decay, not rot, something stale, closed off, like air that had been locked away too long. He forced the lid open the rest of the way. It fell back with a dull, hollow thud. The beam of his flashlight dropped into the space beneath and stopped. For a second, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Then it did. Inside the box, a smaller shape, wrapped, not tightly, carefully. The fabric was worn, faded with time, edges frayed but still intact. It wasn't thrown in, it had been placed, deliberately. His throat tightened. "No," he said again, softer this time. He reached down slowly, hands trembling now. not from fear, but from the weight of understanding beginning to form. The fabric shifted slightly under his touch. Too easily. Too lightly. Whatever was inside, it wasn't solid. His chest tightened further, breath coming slower as something inside him resisted going any further. Behind him, the horse exhaled again. Low, steady, present. Not pushing him forward, but not letting him walk away either. The young man closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. "All right," he whispered. His fingers found the edge of the fabric and began to pull it back. The movement was slow, careful, revealing, piece by piece, until he stopped. His hands froze mid-motion. The world seemed to narrow around him, sound collapsing into a dull, distant hum, because what lay beneath was not what he had prepared himself to see. Not bones, not emptiness. Something else. Something that didn't belong buried in silence. His breath trembled as he pulled the fabric back just a little more. Enough to understand, not enough to accept. Behind him, the horse shifted again, stepping closer than before, its presence now almost at his shoulder, as if it had been waiting for this moment, not to lead him here, but to make sure he didn't face it alone. The young man swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the shape inside the box. "You weren't abandoned," he said softly, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to anymore. The wind picked up suddenly, sweeping across the field, bending the dry grass low against the earth. And somewhere beyond the tree, a distant sound answered it. Not close, not immediate, but real. The young man turned his head slightly, listening. Then back to the box, then to the horse. Something had changed, not just here, out there. Whatever had been buried was no longer the only thing waiting to be found. The night didn't feel empty anymore. It pressed in, alive with something that had been waiting longer than he had been here, longer than the barn, longer than the broken fence. The young man stood still, the open box at his knees, his hands hovering just above what lay inside, as if finishing the motion would make it irreversible. The shape beneath the fabric was smaller than he expected. Not fragile, but final. He swallowed, then gently pulled the cloth back the rest of the way. Inside was a worn, leather satchel, its surface cracked with age, its strap folded neatly beneath it. No decay, no damage. Preserved, intentionally. Hidden, not discarded. For a moment he just stared. Then his hand moved, slower now, more careful. He lifted the satchel out of the box. It was lighter than it looked. Too light for something that had been buried with such purpose. The horse stepped closer. Not touching. Just there. He opened the satchel. Inside. Papers. Old. Folded and refolded so many times the edges had softened into threads. A small photograph slipped loose as he tilted it open, catching the beam of the flashlight before falling gently into the dirt. He froze, then reached down, picking it up between his fingers. The image was faded, but not gone. A younger version of the horse stood in the frame, stronger, its coat brighter, its posture proud. Beside it, a man rested a hand along its neck, his expression steady, familiar in a way that felt close. Too close. The young man's chest tightened. He turned the photo over. A single line, written in worn ink. "Don't let them sell him." The words hit harder than they should have, because they weren't meant for him, and yet they had found him anyway. Behind him the wind moved again, sharper now, cutting across the field with a low, restless sound. The tree creaked softly, its branches shifting like something remembering its place in all of this. The young man flipped through the rest of the papers. Documents, signatures, transfers, ownership records. His hands slowed as the pieces began to align. Not cleanly, not all at once, but enough to form something undeniable. The horse hadn't been rejected. It had been removed, passed along, erased. The final document was different, shorter, unsigned, a statement written more hastily than the others. "If anything happens, keep this hidden. They won't stop if they know." His breath caught. He repeated under his breath. A sound answered him. From the dark. Closer this time. Not the wind, not the horse. Footsteps. The young man's head snapped up, the flashlight swinging toward the edge of the field. The beam caught movement, figures stepping just beyond its reach, shapes forming where there had been nothing moments before. More than one. His grip tightened around the satchel. The horse shifted beside him, its body angling slightly, not away, but between him and the approaching dark. Not protecting, positioning, as if it understood what was coming, and where it needed to stand. The figures stopped just outside the light. "You should have left it buried," a voice called out. Calm, certain. The young man didn't answer. His mind was moving too fast now, trying to hold on to everything at once. The documents, the photo, the warning, the way the horse had led him here not to uncover something random, but something specific. Something that wasn't finished. "You don't know what you're holding," the voice continued. The young man finally spoke, quieter than expected. "I think I do." A pause. Then, a step forward. One of the figures entered the edge of the light, just enough to reveal a face that didn't look surprised, didn't look angry, just expected. The kind of look you give when something delayed finally catches up. "That horse," the man said, nodding slightly toward it, "was never yours to take." The young man's hand tightened around the satchel. "It wasn't theirs to sell," he replied. Silence followed, heavy, measured. The horse didn't move, didn't flinch. It stood exactly where it needed to be. The wind rose again, stronger now, pulling at the edges of everything. The tree, the grass, the loose dirt around the open ground. The past wasn't buried anymore, and whatever had been waiting had finally arrived. The young man took a slow step back, the satchel held firmly in his hand, his eyes locked on the figures ahead. Behind him, the open box remained in the earth. Empty now, but no longer forgotten. The man in the light tilted his head slightly. "You're going to wish you hadn't found that," he said. The young man didn't respond. He didn't need to, because for the first time since the auction, he understood what the horse had done. It hadn't just changed his life. It had brought something unfinished back into the open. And now, there was no putting it back. Some truths don't shout. They wait for someone willing to listen. The horse didn't just lead him to a secret. It forced him to choose between ignoring the past or facing it. And sometimes what we uncover doesn't change the world. It changes who we become. If this story moved you, stay with us for the next one.